It was past midnight in New Orleans, and the rain had just begun to fall. Soft, warm drops that smelled like river water and old brick. Elara Voss stood alone in St. Patient, Louis Cemetery number 1, her coat pulled tight against the damp air. She wasn't supposed to be there. The gates had been locked for hours, but Elara had never cared much for rules, especially when someone died smiling. The man's name was Silas Thorne, a quiet antique dealer who lived above a voodoo shop on Royal Street. He'd been found dead 3 nights ago in his study, sitting upright in his favorite chair, hands folded neatly in his lap, and a strange iron mask resting on his chest. No signs of struggle, no poison. Just Silas' eyes closed, lips curled in a peaceful grin. And that mask, the police called it natural causes. But Elara knew better. She'd seen Silas 2 days before he died. He'd been nervous, jumpy, muttering about the watcher in the walls and the price of seeing too much. Now, standing by his fresh grave, Elara felt eyes on her. She turned, slowly. A figure stood between 2 tombs, cloaked in shadow. Tall, thin, face hidden beneath a wide-brimmed hat. "You shouldn't be here," the stranger said, voice low and rough, like gravel under boots. "Neither should you," Elara replied. The man stepped forward just enough for the dim streetlight to catch the edge of his coat. "You're chasing a ghost, Miss Voss. I'm chasing the truth. The mask isn't truth. It's a trap." Elara narrowed her eyes. "What do you know about it?" The man hesitated. Then, "It's been in this city since the French ruled, worn only by those who dared to uncover its darkest secret. None of them lived long after, and Silas, he put it on." A cold shiver ran down Elara's spine, not from the rain, but from the certainty in the man's voice. Before she could ask more, he turned and walked away, vanishing into the mist between the tombs. Elara turned back to the grave and froze there, resting on top of Silas's headstone, was the iron mask. Rusted, heavy, its eye holes dark and empty, yet somehow watching her. She didn't touch it, not yet. But she knew. One thing, this wasn't over. It had only just begun. Elara didn't pick up the mask that night. Instead, she wrapped it in an oilcloth from her coat pocket and carried it home under her arm like a stolen book. She lived in a small apartment above a bakery on Chartres Street, where the smell of beignets and yeast followed her up the stairs every morning. She placed the mask on her kitchen table and studied it under lamplight. It was heavier than it looked. Cold iron, pitted with age, shaped to fit a human face but expressionless. No mouth, no nose, just 2 hollow eyes and smooth brow etched with strange markings, crescent moons, serpents, and something that looked like old French script, half worn away. She ran her fingers along the edge. It didn't burn, didn't hum, But the longer she stared at it, the more she felt watched. The next morning, she went to see Dr. Henri Moreau, a retired historian who'd written 3 books on colonial New Orleans and knew more about the city's secrets than most living people. His shop was tucked between a fortune teller and a jazz club, filled with yellowed maps, dusty ledgers, and glass cases of old coins and bones. When Elara showed him the mask, his hands began to shake. "Where did you get this?" he whispered. "Silas Thorne's grave." Henri sat down heavily, as if the air had been knocked out of him. "I thought it was gone, lost in the fire of 1842. What fire? The Convent of the Veiled Sisters, a secret order of women who claimed they could see the sins of men just by looking into their eyes. They wore masks like this during their rituals, not to hide their faces, but to become vessels for truth. And Silas, why would he have it?" Henri leaned closer, voice dropping. "Because someone gave it to him, and whoever did wants you to find it now." Elara frowned. "Why me?" "Because you ask questions. Because you don't look away." He paused. "And because the mask chooses who sees next." That night, Elara dreamed of water rising through the streets, of masked figures walking silently through Jackson Square, and of a voice whispering in French, "Look deeper." She woke with a start and found the mask sitting on her pillow. She hadn't moved it there. Her heart pounded. She picked it up slowly. This time, the metal felt warm, and when she turned it over, fresh words were carved into the inside, words that hadn't been there before. "Find the girl who drowned twice." Elara knew then the mask wasn't just an object. It was speaking to her, and the real mystery had only just begun. The phrase stayed with Elara all morning. Find the girl who drowned twice. She'd heard old-timers talk about ghost stories like that. Tales meant to scare children or sell haunted tours. But this didn't feel like a story. It felt like a clue. She went to the city archives, digging through yellowed newspapers from the 1890s. Most drownings were accidents, drunk sailors, runaway carriages on flooded streets. But one name stood out. Lisette Dubois, 817, drowned in Bayou St. John on May 3rd, 1893. But that wasn't the strange part. According to the coroner's report, Lisette had been found already dead when she entered the water. Her body showed no signs of struggle, no water in her lungs, and yet she was pulled from the bayou wearing a soaked white dress and holding a silver locket engraved with a single word, "Remember." Then, 2 weeks later, another body turned up. Same face, same locket, but this time the autopsy confirmed she drowned. 2 bodies. Same girl. Impossible. Elara tracked down the only living descendant listed in the records, an elderly woman named Mama Odette, who ran a small herb shop near Congo Square. The shop smelled of sage, cloves, and something sharp, like lightning after rain. "You're asking about Lisette," Mama Odette said before Elara even spoke. She sat in a rocking chair, eyes milky but knowing. "I've been waiting for someone to come. Why? Because the mask always returns when the veil thins. And you're standing right on the edge of it." Mama Odette leaned forward. "Lisette didn't drown twice. She was made to drown twice, by the ones who wore the mask before Silas. The Veiled Sisters." Mama Odette nodded slowly. "They weren't just seeing sins. They were erasing them, taking guilt from powerful men and binding it into others. Innocents, like Lisette. She carried the sins of a judge, a banker, and a priest until her soul couldn't hold them anymore." "And the mask?" Elara asked. "It doesn't show truth. It transfers it. Whoever wears it next becomes the vessel." A chill ran through Elara. That's why Silas was smiling. He wasn't at peace. He was free. Mama Odette's voice dropped to a whisper. "And now the mask has chosen you." As if on cue, Elara felt the weight of it in her coat pocket, though she'd left it locked in her drawer that morning. She hadn't brought it with her, but it was there, waiting. Elara didn't go home that night. Instead, she walked through the French Quarter until her feet ached, the mask heavy in her pocket like a stone pulled from a grave. She passed street musicians, laughing tourists, flickering candles in iron lanterns. But everything felt distant, muffled, as if she were already halfway into another world. She knew what Mama Odette meant. The mask wasn't just showing secrets. It was offering a burden. And once you took it, there was no giving it back. But if she didn't wear it, who would stop the next Silas, the next Lisette? At dawn, she returned to her apartment. She placed the mask on the table again. Sunlight caught the worn engravings, making the serpents look like they were moving. She thought of Lisette, 17, innocent, used like a sponge to soak up other people's sins. She thought of Silas, smiling in death because someone had finally taken his guilt away. And then she thought of the men still walking free, the ones whose names were never written down, whose crimes were buried under layers of money and silence. Elara took a breath and put on the mask. It fit perfectly, as if made for her. For a moment, nothing happened, just darkness behind the eye holes. Then, images flooded her mind. A courtroom in 1893. A judge slamming a gavel, condemning an innocent man while slipping a bribe into his robe. A banker lighting a cigar with a match made from a child's birth certificate. A priest whispering confession not to God, but to a ledger of debts. And beneath it all, a network of tunnels beneath New Orleans, where the Veiled Sisters once met, and where someone still met today. The visions stopped as suddenly as they began. Elara gasped, tearing the mask off. Her hands trembled. Sweat soaked her shirt. But now she knew. The sins weren't gone. They were stored somewhere underground. And the mask wasn't just a vessel. It was a key. One last message glowed faintly inside the iron. burned into the metal by her touch, beneath St. Anthony's altar. St. Anthony's Church, abandoned since the yellow fever outbreak of 1878. Crumbling walls, broken stained glass, and according to city records, sealed catacombs below. Elara knew she couldn't do this alone, but she also knew if she told anyone, they'd think she'd lost her mind. So she packed a flashlight, a knife, and the mask, and headed for the old church at dusk. The truth was waiting, and this time she wouldn't just see it, she'd end it. The gates of St. Anthony's Church were chained shut, rusted over decades of silence. But Elara didn't need a key. She slipped through a gap in the crumbling stone wall where ivy had torn the fence from its post. The church loomed ahead, its steeple crooked, windows shattered like blind eyes. Moonlight poured through the broken roof, casting long shadows across pews, thick with dust and dead leaves. She found the altar easily. It was cracked down the middle, as if struck by lightning. Kneeling, she ran her fingers along the base and felt it a loose stone. She pried it free. Behind it was a narrow staircase, spiraling down into darkness. The air grew colder as she descended. The smell of wet earth and old incense clung to the walls. At the bottom, a tunnel stretched ahead, lined with iron sconces holding candles that shouldn't have been burning, but were. At the end of the tunnel stood a chamber. In the center sat a stone table. On it lay dozens of masks, iron, silver, even bone, each one etched with names and dates. Silas Thorne's mask was there too, though Elara still held hers, a perfect copy. And kneeling before the table was a girl in a white dress soaked and shivering. Lisette, not a ghost, not a memory, real. She looked up at Elara with wide, frightened eyes. "They keep making me wear it," she whispered. "Every time someone new puts on the mask, I have to drown again." Elara stepped forward. "Who's doing this?" Before Lisette could answer, a voice echoed from the shadows. "We are." 3 figures emerged, hooded, faces hidden, just like the veiled sisters from Henri's books. But their hands were gloved in modern leather. One wore a police badge on his belt. Another, a banker's ring. The third, a priest's collar beneath his robe. They weren't relics of the past. They were still here. Still powerful. Still hiding behind the mask. "You think you're the first to come down here," the priest said, voice smooth as oil. "Silas tried to stop us. So did others. But the city needs balance, Miss Voss. Someone must carry the weight of our sins." "And you chose her," Elara said, gesturing to Lisette. "She volunteered," the banker lied. "For money, for her family." Lisette shook her head fiercely. "They took my brother, said they'd kill him if I didn't take the first sin. Then they never let me go." Elara's grip tightened on the mask in her hand. "You don't need a vessel," she said. "You need to face what you've done." The judge, the one with the badge, stepped forward. Take the mask off, Elara. Walk away, or you'll drown next. Elara looked at Lisette, then at the table of masks, then at the three men who thought they owned the truth. She raised the iron mask, not to her face, but high above her head, and brought it down hard on the stone table. The mask shattered. A sound like 1,000 screams filled the chamber. The candles blew out. The other masks cracked and crumbled to dust. Lisette gasped, and for the first time, her dress began to dry. The fear left her eyes. The three men fell to their knees, clutching their chests, as if something inside them had broken loose. Elara didn't wait to see more. She took Lisette's hand. "Let's go home," she said, and together they walked out of the dark, into the rain-washed streets of a city finally ready to remember. 3 days after the catacombs, New Orleans woke to a different kind of silence. Not the quiet of secrets, but the hush of truth settling in. The judge resigned. The banker was arrested for embezzlement and worse. Names from old ledgers surfaced, thanks to files Elara left anonymously at the district attorney's office. The priest vanished, last seen boarding a bus out of state with no luggage. No one spoke of the mask, but everyone felt its absence. Lisette stayed with Elara. She wasn't a ghost, just a girl who'd been hidden away for over a century by a magic that fed on guilt and fear. With the mask broken, time released her. She aged slowly at first, then, all at once, catching up to the present like a river, finally reaching the sea. She got a job at a bookstore in the Garden District, learned to use a phone, laughed at movies she'd never seen. And every Sunday, she placed a white rose on Silas Thorne's grave. Not for what he did, but for what he tried to stop. As for Elara, she kept working as a private investigator. But now, people came to her not just for lost husbands or stolen heirlooms, but for honesty, for closure, for someone who wouldn't look away. One evening, weeks later, she walked past St. Shiska, Anthony's church. The city had begun restoring it. New roof, fresh paint, children playing in the courtyard where weeds once grew. She stopped at the gate and looked down at her hands. No mask, no visions, just calluses, coffee stains, and a faint scar from a case years ago. Peaceful. That night, rain fell again, soft and warm, washing the streets clean. And somewhere in the French Quarter, a street musician played a slow, sweet tune on a trumpet, as if the city itself were sighing in relief. The Iron Mask was gone, but New Orleans remembered, and this time it chose to heal. Mardi Gras morning in New Orleans is never quiet, but this year it felt lighter. No one could say why. Maybe it was the unusually clear sky. Maybe it was the way the brass bands played with less frenzy and more joy. Or maybe it was because, for the first time in over a century, no one disappeared during the parades. Elara sat on her balcony above Chartres Street, sipping chicory coffee. Below, Costumed revelers tossed beads and laughed, their masks bright and temporary, worn for fun, not fate. A knock came at her door. She opened it to find Lisette holding 2 beignets dusted in powdered sugar and a small potted magnolia sapling. "Peace offering," Lisette said with a smile, "for waking you up last night when I had that dream." "You didn't wake me," Elara said. "I was already up." They both knew what the dream was about. The tunnels, the masks, the weight of old sins. But the nightmares were fading now, like scars in sunlight. Lisette set the plant on the railing. "Mama Odette says magnolias grow strong here, even after hurricanes." Elara looked at the little tree, its leaves trembling in the breeze. "Then it'll fit right in." They stood in comfortable silence as a jazz band marched past, trumpets blazing. A child in a feathered mask pointed up at them and waved. Lisette waved back. Later, when the streets emptied and the city took a breath before the evening's final celebration, Elara noticed something tucked between the magnolia's roots. A single iron bead, dull and cold, shaped like a teardrop. She almost threw it away, but instead, she buried it deep in the soil, not out of fear, but so the earth could finally forgive it. The bayou was calm that morning, still as glass, reflecting the cypress trees like a second sky. Lisette Dubois sat on the bank, bare feet in the water, humming a lullaby her mother used to sing. She was supposed to be at the dressmaker's by 9, but she'd woken with a heaviness in her chest, like a stone had taken root beneath her ribs. She didn't know why, not yet. Her little brother, Julien, played nearby with a carved wooden boat. He was 7, all mischief and laughter, and he'd promised to sail it all the way to the Mississippi. "Don't go too far," Lisette called gently. "I won't," he shouted back, already knee-deep. That was when the men came. 3 of them, well-dressed, polite smiles. They said they were from the city council, needed her help with a matter of civic importance. They spoke of honor, of duty, of protecting her family. And then, quietly, "Your brother is safe. For now." They led her to a carriage. No one stopped them. No one ever did when men like that walked the streets. By nightfall, she stood in a candlelit chamber beneath St. Anthony's. The air smelled of incense and iron. A woman in black handed her the mask. "It will not hurt," the woman lied. "Only for a moment. Then you'll forget." But Lisette didn't forget. She felt it. The judge's cruelty, the banker's greed, the priest's lies, pouring into her like floodwater through a broken levee. Her knees buckled. She gasped, clawing at her chest, but the mask held fast. When they finally removed it, she collapsed. "You did well," the judge said, patting her head like a dog. "They gave her a silver locket. Remember," it said, and sent her home. But Lisette remembered too much. The next day she walked to the bayou again. Not to work, not to play. She stepped into the water slowly, as if returning to something familiar. Julian wasn't there. She didn't call for him. She just sank, and when they pulled her out hours later, lips blue and dressed soaked, she was already gone. But not finished, because the mask had marked her, and New Orleans never lets go of its ghosts. Silas Thorne didn't believe in curses. He believed in ledgers, ink, and the weight of a well-made key. An antique dealer by trade, a historian by heart, he spent his days restoring broken clocks and piecing together forgotten letters from the 1800s. His shop on Royal Street smelled of beeswax, cedar, and old paper. The scent of time kept tidy. But that evening, everything changed. A client had brought him a writing desk, French, early 1800s, salvaged from a collapsed townhouse near the Garden District. Beautiful, but locked. All drawers opened, except one, a small hidden compartment beneath the inkwell. Silas tried every key in his collection. Nothing fit. Frustrated, he tapped the wood and heard a hollow echo. He pried gently with a letter opener. The panel gave way. Inside lay a single object wrapped in oil-stained silk. The iron mask. It was cold to the touch, even in the humid New Orleans air. He turned it over in his hands, tracing the strange markings. Something about it felt watchful. That night he couldn't sleep. He sat at his work table, the mask before him like an accusation. Around 2 a.m., he did something foolish. He put it on. Just for a second, the world didn't go dark. It opened. He saw a courtroom where a man was hanged for a crime he didn't commit, while the real killer adjusted his cufflinks in the front row. He saw a banker burning mortgage papers while families wept outside. He saw a priest whispering lies into a dying woman's ear, stealing her last confession like a coin from a corpse. And beneath it all, a voice, soft as river mist. You see now. Will you carry it? Silas tore the mask off, gasping. His hand shook for hours, but by dawn, he'd made his choice. He wouldn't destroy it. He couldn't. The truth needed witnesses, so he began to dig into city records, church archives, burial logs. He tracked names, dates, patterns. He wrote everything down in a leather-bound journal, hiding it behind a loose brick in his fireplace, and every night he placed the mask back in its drawer. Not out of fear, but respect. He knew what it demanded. Not silence, but sacrifice. Years passed. His hair grayed. His steps slowed. But he never stopped watching. And when the men in dark coats finally came to his door, polite, smiling, asking if he'd found anything interesting lately, he knew his time was short. So he sat in his favorite chair, placed the mask on his chest, and smiled. Let them think he died peacefully. Let them think the secret died with him. But Silas had left one final clue for someone sharp enough, brave enough, to follow it. He just hoped she'd find it before the mask chose someone else. Before there were jazz clubs, streetcars, or even cobblestones on Bourbon Street, New Orleans was a city of mud, fever, and secrets whispered. in French and Choctaw, and in a stone convent hidden behind jasmine vines near the river, 7 women gathered in silence. They called themselves Les Sœurs Voilées, the Veiled Sisters, not nuns, not witches, but daughters of merchants, soldiers, and freedwomen who had seen too much. Men burning deeds to steal land, officials poisoning rivals with wine, fathers selling their own children to servitude, all while lighting candles in church and calling it God's will. One of them, Sister Marguerite, had watched her brother hang for a theft committed by the governor's son. She could not unsee it, so she forged a mask, not from silver or wood, but from iron salvaged from a broken ship's anchor, melted down in secret, and shaped by a blacksmith who asked no questions. She etched it with symbols from old African talismans, Catholic prayers, and native star maps, anything that might hold truth without breaking. On the night of the Great Fire, the one that would soon burn half the city to ash, she placed the mask upon her face and saw everything. Not just crimes, but sins. The rot inside men's hearts, the lies they fed their wives, the children they abandoned, the promises they drowned in rum. The vision nearly killed her. But when she woke, she knew what must be done. We cannot punish them, she told the others. The law protects them. The church blesses them. But we can take their sin, carry it away. And so they began. They would find a willing soul, always someone with nothing left to lose, and offer them peace in exchange for burden. The mask would transfer the guilt, the shame, the hidden evil into the vessel. The powerful man would walk free, lighter, unaware. And the vessel, they would drown. Not in water, but in memory, until their body could bear no more. It was mercy and murder wrapped in one. The first vessel was a young enslaved woman named Celeste. She agreed if they would free her younger sister. They did. Celeste walked into the Mississippi at dawn, and the mask grew heavier. Over decades, the ritual continued. The sisters died. Others took their place. The mask passed from hand to hand, always hidden, always waiting. They told themselves it was necessary, but deep down they knew. They hadn't cleansed the city. They'd only buried its poison deeper. And one day, the ground would crack open. Someone would dig it up, and the mask would finally demand justice, not sacrifice.